Hello?
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi. Everyone's just pouring
just
on.
checking everything out, that's all. And I can see Ray Lutz has joined us too. Hey, Ray.
Hey.
I'm muting.
Harvey, have you joined? Oh, here, I think that's it. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Zaitz. People are just pouring on now, so give us a minute.
Thank you, sir.
Harvey, is that you?
My name is Dick Platkin. I don't know why my video isn't on. I've never done Zoom through my cell phone before, only on my computer.
Hey, Ned, how you doing? Hey, Peter, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, there we go.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, Harvey, is that you?
It is.
Okay, you're owner, I guess.
On, yes. There we go. Hi, Ray. Hey, John. Who else we got?
Norm's
Hi,
here.
Peter. Janet. We're up to 19. Norm.
Yeah.
You might want to look. There you go. Are you so far? God, we should have a beer. Peter Burgess.
Hello there.
How are you? Where are you, Peter?
I'm in the Poconos of Pennsylvania,
Oh, cool.
and with a very boring background, but a nice view out of the window.
Standard. Norm, do you not have heat?
Yeah, it's Wisconsin. It's Wisconsin.
Like you're all bundled up for winter. How cold is there? All right, we're up to 20. Hi, Stephen.
Hey there.
Are you in DC, Stephen?
Yes,
Okay, good.
I'm in Virginia, near DC.
Well, that's right. Are we safe to say that Virginia is a fairly safe blue state in the coming election?
No. You know, it depends upon what kind of campaign that is run and how many people can vote, you know? And that's what this is all about. They make it difficult for people to vote in the middle of a pandemic. Who knows what's going to happen?
Do you have a blue Secretary of State?
Yeah, I mean, all the what we need really, and what they're talking about in Virginia, is to have a special session of legislature this summer to pass some new laws that'll make it easier to vote.
Okay.
But I could speak about some of the problems if anybody wants to hear that.
It'll probably be next week. We'll see how fast this goes. We've got a ton to cover. But yes, that'd be good.
Sure.
I mean, we're considering.
I see.
You're breaking up, Steve.
Guys.
Okay. We'll wait till 5 minutes pass. We've got 21 people on the call so far. Joel Siegel just joined us.
Hey, Harv, how you doing, my friend?
Good. How are you, Joel?
Same as always, laid back, trying to change the world.
Well, you're all dressed up for the call.
Well, you know, you're a
Joel,
special
you never
guy.
learn.
Steven spits in
Peter
the house.
Burgess, we're going to have to ask you to loosen your tie.
Yeah.
Hey, Mimi.
Hey, I'm here.
You know what? That is a great picture of Mimi, by the way, where I got to learn how to do
probably
that.
keep that up there.
No, I like
you
the one right
great.
in front of me, but I don't have a picture of me if I leave my video. I got to figure that out, but I'm not that smart.
I like to see the video. I do.
How are you, Mimi?
I'm pretty good. I can't believe I'm as into this as I am, but
I can.
Wasserman roped me in.
I
Well, you've
did,
been
but
working
you
on
know,
this
this is
20 years.
life and death. I mean, they canceled the New York primary today.
I know.
Oh my God.
I know. And did you just get the hi, Steve? Did you get that thing about how the GOP states? Did you write that or send that, Steve? Was this
Steve,
thing
was
vote
from
by
Steve
mail?
Rosenfeld. So at the bottom of the agenda, there are two links. One to an article with me and Bob Fitrakis at Counterpunch, which is kind of a strategic overview, and then Steve Rosenfeld's latest report on what's going on with the elections. So let's see, Paul,
Yeah.
do you want to give us the tech specs here, or should we wait? It's only 2:04. Let's wait another minute. We're up to 29.
Text back.
Yeah, a few people are coming on now.
Yeah. Well, we have the chat and the share screen and the participants, and you need to tell people how to raise their hand and how to put comments in and stuff like that. We're at 31. I assume a few of the people on were not on the previous call. There's Bill Honigman. Hi.
Hi, Ray.
Hey, Bill. How are you?
Good.
Where are you?
Where? Montana.
Okay. You look like, oh, there's a moose in the window in the back there.
No, really.
A moose in the bike.
Oh. Breaky's got the Arizona sunset again.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's always, or sunrise. It's always sunrise in Arizona.
That's right.
Okay, Harvey, there's like 36, so I think we have a critical mass.
36 is
Hi,
a good
everyone.
number.
Why don't
If
we
you'll
just
give
kick
us
it
the
off?
If you'll give us the basics, Paul, then we'll start.
Yeah, I'm going to mute everyone, Harvey, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
Oh,
Unmute yourself.
got to cross.
All right. So Harvey, you're unmuted now.
Okay.
Welcome everyone. Hi, my name is Dr. Paul Zeitz. I'm moderating this call in terms of the technology side. So I'll be available on the chat if you have any questions. This call is being sponsored by Solartopia, Harvey's organization, and the COVID-19 Emergency Response Group. This group was formed in March 2020 by leading public health experts, faith and business leaders, former, senior, and current Hill staffers, current and former local and state elected officials, and leaders of global, national, and local NGOs. Our mission is to support others in mobilizing the people's voice to save as many lives as possible. And I think our executive committee has identified the voting rights in this election year to be a top priority. So that's why we're happy to support Harvey in this effort. So if you got an invitation from me, then you are on our list. If you did not, please send your email address to Harvey, and I'll put his email in the chat. Harvey will run the call, and then if you want to raise your hand, you go into, actually, I don't have that feature on mine, so I think you click on participants and then you raise your hand by where your name is. You can also contact us through the chat, and I will make sure that you get called on as Harvey is moderating the call. Joel Siegel is the national coordinator of the COVID-19 Emergency Response Group, so if you have particular follow-up with him on that, he's available at always. Over to you, Harvey.
Okay, so if this is your first call, or if you got the notification from me, email me back and I'll add you to the list. I'm at solartopia@gmail. S-O-L-A-R, there's my shirt, solartopia@gmail. Email me back and then you'll be added to the list. So it's 2:07, we can go till California time, we can go till 3:30. It sounds like a long call, but if last week was any indication. Well, we have a very full agenda. I don't know how many of you got the agenda, but it's simple, and I'll go through it as we move along. But the purpose of this call and the purpose of this group is to protect our democracy through the election. And we will meet, if God willing, every week at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time on Monday until the election. And the point is that our strategic goal is to establish election protection groups in every state, but especially in the 12 swing states. And this is becoming a mantra, but it's Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Florida, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and that's it, back to Iowa. So that's a trip around the United States. Those 12 states will decide the presidency. And in each of them, in 9 of them, we have Jim Crow legislatures that were put in power because of the gerrymandering that was instituted after the 2010 or during the 2010 election. And one of the things I want to throw in here, we will not be able to deal with it in this election cycle. But after the election, if God willing, we still have a democracy of any kind, we do want to go ahead and try and do the anti-gerrymandering referenda that have been done in California, Michigan, and elsewhere, so that we have bipartisan or nonpartisan election commissions that will do the redistricting. It happened first in California in the 2000s, and it was actually passed in part because of a $3 million personal donation by Arnold Schwarzenegger. If anybody works out.
Harvey, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's someone by the name of James Heddle.
Yes.
Who is like sharing his screen, and I need him to undo that.
Okay, Jim and Mary Beth, you got to undo your share of your screen. Okay, thank you.
You know them? I want to make sure. There's a lot of people that aren't identified in the list here. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, we know them.
Okay, great. So they're sharing their screen. If they could unshare their screen, that would be great.
Yeah, everybody will have to call in separately, I'm afraid, Jim. Thank you, though. That's Jim Heddle from Bolinas with a great film group, and Mary Beth up there. Great. So are we all still rolling here? I'm looking at the introduction on the screen. If we don't need that.
Okay, yeah, just
okay.
That was their. I figured out how to unshare their screen. Go ahead. Sorry.
So the purpose of this is we're going to try and establish solid election protection groups in all the 12 swing states to guarantee that we at least get a decent vote. In those states, there are 6 additional states we're talking about, which is Georgia, which also has a Jim Crow legislature and a Jim Crow governor, but it has Stacey Abrams and 2 Senate races. Kansas has a Jim Crow legislature, but a Democratic governor. And there is a Senate race there. Texas, we may be 4 years early on the demographics, but there are those who think we have a chance to have a fair election in Texas. And Andrea Miller, who Joel Siegel will talk about in a couple of minutes, is at work there, and she has a great track record. Montana, we do have Bill on from Montana to talk about this. We do have a Democratic governor there who's running for U.S. Senate, and Montana does have actually somewhat of a liberal heritage. The big prize in the marginal states is Kentucky. We do have a Democratic governor there. In fact, he just issued an executive order to fair up the elections, and that's where Mitch McConnell is running for re-election. And then another long shot would be West Virginia, which does have a Democratic senator. So, and we are not a Democratic organization, Democratic Party, far from it. We are nonpartisan technically, but we are clearly up against an election system that's being smashed into mostly by the Republican Party. I'm of the opinion, by the way, that the Democratic primaries in 2020, as they were in 2016, were rigged and stolen. But that's another question, and it's under the water, under the bridges at the moment. So our mission is to protect election integrity right up to election day in November and beyond, in the fall elections. And of course, election day has been expanded, as Mimi pointed out last call. We really want to talk about a fall election. We want to break the pattern of that everybody votes on a single day. If there's going to be democracy in the fall, it's going to be more than just November 3rd. And not only leading up to it, but what happens afterwards is extremely important. And since we're at that, I want to point out one of the issues we're going to have to deal with come the fall election is that if we're doing a lot of this by vote by mail, which obviously most of the states are going to have at least some vote by mail, if not all of them, and predominantly in many states, and in many of those states for the first time, there are legal deadlines for reporting in these states. And we know that the vote by mail count will be a mess in many of these states. And we've already had a situation in Florida where the outcome for both governor and US Senator were severely impacted by a deadline for reporting. And one of the things we're going to have to do 6 months in advance now is to take a good look at these deadlines for reporting and see how we can get legislative or judicial relief so that these states which are doing vote by mail for the first time are not under impossible deadlines to get the votes counted. It's a very serious issue, and that's among the issues we're going to be dealing with. Okay, so my intention, and please refer to me as Sluggo. Harvey Weinstein is in prison, and I get confused with him all the time. Also, Deborah Wasserman Schultz. We don't want to have anything to do with that, so just call me Sluggo. That'll be the title of my autobiography, by the way. So one of my missions in this is to take the information from these calls. These calls, by the way, are recorded, and they will be sent to radio stations, radio networks, Pacifica, Progressive Radio Network, Progressive Voices Network, and others. And some of them do have restrictions on those 7 deadly words from George Carlin. So if you want to curse, go ahead and curse in Yiddish. That'll be perfectly fine. I do intend to produce a handbook that'll be an ongoing document. It'll have 3 basic components. One will be a state-by-state breakdown of what we face in each state. And of course, as I mentioned, a major goal is to produce, to organize or have come out of this very powerful state-by-state organizations to protect the ballot. As I said, especially in the swing states, but everywhere. This is a national issue. We're getting a note from Norm Stockwell, cursing in any language is illegal on the radio, so okay, forget the Yiddish. You'll just have to restrain yourself. So I am going to produce an ongoing workbook, I guess, as opposed to a handbook, with 3 categories of information. One, the situation in each state, state by state. And Steve Roosevelt's been doing a great job going state by state. John Brakey, some other people have been on the road with this. Number 2, the organizations and organizational listing of everything that we need. And number 3, an issue by issue compendium. In other words, vote by mail. We'll have a section, the surrender rule, which Mimi's going to talk about, polling and drop off places, reporting deadlines, all the other major registration, roll stripping and reinstatement, all the major issues that we will face generically, there'll be a section on that. And it'll be an ongoing document. I will have a publisher who can do it on demand if people do want paper copies as we move ahead. But that's primarily, and I should have drafts going within a couple of weeks. Okay, so that much said, we are going to try and hook up with Progressive Democrats of America. We have the great Mimi Kennedy on the line. I don't know if Alan Minsky has joined us yet, but we have talked about having PDA essentially be a co-host with the COVID group to help recruit organizers and to house documents as they proceed. Mimi, can you talk a bit about PDA and what we might expect?
I got really focused on something called the surrender rule because I saw so many of the big name, big money organizations choosing as their demand that there be expanded vote by mail, which I'm fully in support of because I don't want to see Wisconsin. And I know, everything we all know, vote by mail has many traps. There's the dependence on a chain of custody that's completely obscure. And that alone is a huge problem, but we must have it. So I zeroed in on something that as a poll worker I've seen for 15 years. And I am on a registrar's committee here, and they never named it and they never admitted what it was. It's what I call the surrender rule. And the rule is that if you receive a mail ballot from the registrar, either because the state has decided to send a vote by mail ballot to everybody, or because they've started with no excuse sending vote by mail ballots and everybody, many more people get one. If you don't show, if you want to vote in person instead, perhaps you didn't get your vote by mail ballot, perhaps it was intercepted, perhaps you left it on the dining room table because you didn't know about this rule, and you show up to vote in person, the poll worker has to legally assume that you voted that mail ballot, and they cannot give you by law anything except a provisional ballot. That's the way it is in California. It used to suppress at least 10 to 15% of my voters at every single election, usually the new voters and the young voters and the Latino voters, and that's who I saw in my precinct. So I call it the surrender rule. It was in Florida. Tim Canova didn't even know about it when he was running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I looked up Florida election code. There it was, not in so much language, but in a lot of language. You were going to have to show up with that mail ballot if you got one. So the schemes are many. One is signing people up vote by mail and they don't even know it. So they don't even know they're getting the ballot. They don't know its significance. They innocently go to vote at the polls. They get trapped into a provisional ballot. That's just one of the many schemes. So I'm looking at the surrender rule. Steve Rosenfeld is going to help research all the election codes, and we're going to do state by state. I have an example of how to do it on my computer with California, where you find it, how you find it, cut and paste. And then Steve will distill it down for voters, and they'll be able to look up on our website, hopefully on Vote Trust and on PDA, what your state requires for mail ballot voters to know, so they don't get caught in the surrender rule trap, just one of the many traps, but the easiest one to get voters on. I think there will be a combo of vote by mail plus in-person voting. There's no way, I don't think people, election officials are ready to go to all vote by mail and nothing open for early voting or in person, but be that as it may, that's what I want to prepare for, the mixture. And for that, I need to do this research. And as an example of how difficult our work sometimes is, this will take somebody 2-3 weeks of sitting at their desk and doing this most of the day. And that's just this one rule. But I know from being a poll worker, I've identified it. That's why there's always so many provisionals in California, and nobody ever talked about it. They pretended that people showed up at the wrong precinct. Please, it was a surrender rule. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, great. So the surrender rule is not, I mean, there must be a national version, but it will be enforced differently state by state.
Well,
we need everybody in the states to understand what their state is going to do about the surrender rule.
That's right. If you're sent a ballot, that's your legal ballot. You can't vote again without exchanging that legal ballot for your in-person legal vote. I don't know how the states do it, but we're going to find out the language. That's right, Harvey.
Okay, so since you opened the, we're going to wait for Alan Minsky to come on to talk about the role of Progressive Democrats of America, which is still in formation, but I want to do it when he's on the phone. So I want to jump, since you've raised this vote by mail issue, Ray Lutz, are you on the, I'm looking at you. Ray, can you give us a brief, there has been a report on vote by mail in California done by Stanford. Can you, now it applies only to California apparently, but again, we're talking about vote by mail, which is going to be in all the states. So can you tell us briefly about this report? And then I'll post up where people can get it.
Yes, thank you, Harvey Sluggo. Basically, it was a really good report. It's probably the best one that I've seen. It is centered on California, but California does have a fairly extensive and very, I think, they've been cooperative with the voting rights groups in order to put in a lot of, signature curing and that type of thing. So what they did was the students at Stanford did a 6-month review of the various procedures, and this study has pictures of the envelopes, the rates of return, and so you know, things to be done to improve things. Indeed, it doesn't apply to you know, our big problem coming up, which in this next election is the fact, and this was covered on another call that you weren't on, Harvey, but the issue that we see as we discuss the various states, places like Connecticut, for example, where they're really used to going to the polls. They have very, very limited absentee voting. They don't have the infrastructure in place to do any automation for signature comparison, et cetera. And they also have, again, as you mentioned, these strict deadlines where they have in their constitution a requirement that everything's done in 14 days, something
14
along
days is, I mean, there are other states where it's like 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, so I think
it's a
theirs
huge
is maybe
deal.
even less. Yeah, I'm sort of guessing on that one. But it was, as we looked at the bill that they put forward, you know, they tried to get through the Senate in this last, well, the first bailout package. I predicted that it wouldn't make it because it was just, as we looked at it, the timeline was really impossible for people or states that were new to extensive vote by mail or no excuse absentee voting. The other big difference between these states is they tend to take the vote by mail ballots, bring them to the precincts where, you know, sort them by precinct, and then on election day, they bring them all to the precinct and they process them at the precinct in the same way they do the other ballots. So that means that you can't accept something that was postmarked and later or anything like that. So it has to be received by election day and then delivered to the precinct where they handle them all there just like they were an in-person voting. So they do all of the checking for the signatures amongst those people that are in the precinct. And actually that works pretty good in a lot of ways because those people tend to know who the voters are and they know what their signatures look like and stuff like this. So there's not so much a centralized procedure like you see in other places, but it won't scale up. If you say everybody's going to vote this way, then all of a sudden they get a vast number of envelopes at each one of the precincts. It's just not going to work that way. So this is why, even though the Stanford study is, and I'll give everybody the link, make sure it gets circulated because it's extremely good reading and very interesting. And one of the things that I thought was surprising to me in this, and now in California, you can get, you can send in your ballot and postmark it by election day. They have 3 days to receive it. And then if it's not signed or the signature doesn't match, they have a 5-day window to ask you, send you a letter to say, come in and cure your missing signature or mismatch. And then they find that a second letter is really useful to get people to come if they don't do it. And they also found that letters work better, surprisingly enough, than email, Facebook messages, SMS messages, et cetera, which some of them were using. But we have this new law called it's called Everyone Votes Act. That's not what it is, but it's basically pushing for people to be able to have very, very easy vote by mail access as they have in some of these other states like Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, where it's a sort of a default that you would go with vote by mail versus the other one. So it's going to be tricky as we look at the COVID-19 situation, dealing with the different states, their constitutional laws and how they're used to handling the election and phasing into vote by mail is going to be a big challenge for them. Even if they started today, getting it all done in that period of time would be basically impossible. So I think there's another document that I will circulate that is from the legal group, and they essentially had, I think, a pretty well-balanced proposal about how to address these things in the best way that we can before, and in November, given that it's already been set up by Trump that he's going to be saying that vote by mail is untrustworthy, and if he doesn't win, then he can say, "I see what I said, so it's all fake news that I wasn't reelected," and then just stay. That's the I think the big fear of everybody that I talk to, is that we're going to have this unless so this is, I'm thanking you for setting this call up.
Well, Ray, and I sent in on your call, we're going to do this in greater detail next week. I want to devote a substantial chunk to the detail of vote by mail, because it can be a nightmare here. You know, especially signature verification. I'm just going to put that on the table, is a perfect excuse for invalidating as many ballots as they want, and refusal to send out sufficient ballots, pinpointing zip codes where they won't send out ballots, misprinting ballots. As Bob Fitrakis and I reported in 2004, in Southern Ohio, they sent out absentee ballots that were printed without John Kerry's name on them. I imagine the guy's friend, the Democratic nominee for President of the United States, did not appear on mail-out ballots. So, you know, there's all sorts of things that can be done with vote by mail. And as you said, 6 months to set up vote by mail in states that have never done it, or done it only marginally with absentee ballots, is going to be a nightmare. So thank you, Paul. We'll look at those 2 reports, and next week we'll have a much more substantial discussion with Mimi. And Jennifer has texted that North Carolina does not require surrender of the ballot yet, but the legislature is not shut for the season. That, you know, it's always dangerous when one of these Jim Crow legislatures is in session. You know, God forbid. And we're talking about basically Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona. These are all, and Iowa. These are all swing states with, shall we say, unpredictable legislatures, or all too predictable legislatures that can pretty much do anything to the voting process. So we're going to have to be very careful with that. So we'll come back to vote by mail in greater detail next week, and it's obviously a key deciding point in the upcoming election. Okay, let's talk about, we're going to go now through the swing states. I do want to mention, someone pointed out to me, vote by mail is how they do it with the military. And if we do want to see a model for how it's, not that it's the greatest, but it has been done with the military for a long, long time. And I had someone email me and told me that when the ballots come to the email to the military guys, they sit them all in a room, and in many cases, the commanding officer watches them vote. So, you know, that's not exactly something we're looking for. It's also very clear that with vote by mail that students are having, and students and Native and Indigenous have a very similar challenge, in that it's a question of a permanent address. If students are at college, where do they get their ballot? And the same with the Indigenous on the reservations, mostly have post boxes, not permanent addresses. This is a major issue, of course, in New Mexico and Arizona, but it's also been an issue elsewhere. And it was a significant issue in 2004, where the ballots were on the Indian reservations in New Mexico were beheaded, and thousands came in without a choice for president. John Kerry was informed, and of course, never said a word about that. So these are issues that come up with vote by mail we're gonna have to deal with. And just to epitomize all of what we're up against, in Texas, as I mentioned last week, you can get a ballot with a hunting license and a gun license, but not a student ID. So that's the epitome of where we're at with this. Okay, last time we talked, Bob Fitrakis, are you with us?
Yes.
Okay,
Can
so
you hear me?
you told us there is a primary tomorrow in Ohio. Can you give us an update about what's been happening with the balloting there and the state of the election?
Well, there's been a report, and we were able to verify one. There's been a problem with people getting the wrong party ballot.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And this is occurring, again, in Black areas and predominantly Democratic areas. And we don't think it's the national. There's a huge battle going on within the party between the progressive and the Bernie forces, and Morgan Harper's running, and there's a battle over the Central Committee. So the problem is, of course, you've got people at risk, and there was supposed to be no in-person voting other than the disabled. But the Secretary of State has issued orders saying that since it has to be postmarked by today, that they could go down and exchange ballots at the one mandated Board of Election site in each county.
And the one in Franklin County, as you and I discussed, is in the middle of nowhere. It's like an old Target or something, right?
Well, it's a abandoned, formerly abandoned Kohl's department store. Yeah,
That's the one place in Central Ohio. Franklin County has 1.5 million people, and the one place you can go to in person, bring your ballot or clear up an issue with your registration is completely in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's not real accessible. It's in an old, rundown, former strip mall area.
Okay.
But,
so
yeah,
basically,
so they did do that. The problem is, of course, with the virus is, in many cases, people will have to put themselves at risk to go out and turn it in. There are no local drops. There are no local sites that used to be polling places. There's only one place opened on election day.
unbelievable. And so people are getting ballots from the wrong party.
Yes.
And the situation is not. Is there any situation that's going to put? The Secretary of State of Ohio did want to send everybody ballots.
Correct.
And what happened with that?
The state legislature, not only were they going to allow people to vote early through no excuses, sending everyone a ballot, they also were going to have some in-person. The polling sites would have been opened as well, but that would have been on June 2nd. The legislature pointed out the Secretary of State has no authority to set the date, so they reset the date with no polling places. So it's tomorrow, and the postmark has to be by today. Many people also report getting their ballots late. You send them in 2-3 weeks ahead of time, and many of them were just arriving over the weekend.
So in Ohio, we have one of these Jim Crow legislatures. It's just awful. Ohio is about 50-50 Democrat, Republican, but both houses of the legislature are 2/3, 3/4 Republican. And we have a Republican governor who's not a Trumpite, Mike DeWine, and the Secretary of State, who seems to actually believe in democracy, but he's a Republican. And they have been overridden by the state legislature. Is that right?
Correct.
And that's what will happen in the fall. So we're looking at a complete disaster in the swing state of Ohio in the fall.
The Secretary of State also pointed out if people had these wrong ballots, couldn't get them postmarked by today, is that he also suggested they vote provisionally. You can vote provision. So it's not a swap. It's you're swapping the wrong ballot for a provisional vote.
So I think we should continue.
Which are at risk, as we all know.
More than at risk. I mean, I think we should just really refer to provisional ballots as biofuel. Okay, thanks, Bob. And we'll have another report from you next week after the fiasco is done. Hi, Emily, I just see you here. Let's go to Wisconsin. Thanks, Bob. Norm Stockton, can you unmute and give us a report on Wisconsin? Norm Stockton is the publisher of the Progressive magazine, and we're joined by
Stockwell, Harvey.
Norm Stockwell. Sorry, Norm Stockton was the point guard for the Utah Jazz.
Yeah.
It's too bad you can't switch bank accounts with him. Okay, go ahead, Norm. You're up there in the North Country.
Yeah, so we just had a primary election earlier this month, and I know that it's been in the national news quite a bit. So forgive me if I repeat things that that you've already read or heard elsewhere, but it's worth kind of going through the details.
Well, especially what we can look forward to in the fall. We did go through it pretty good, but we want to know what we're looking at going into the future.
But one thing that was interestingly complex about this election is that it wasn't just the presidential primary, but rather there was a lot of different statewide or offices around the state. There was a statewide Supreme Court race, and then there was a bunch of smaller elections for school board and county board. So there was actually about 4,000 seats on the ballot in different parts of the state throughout Wisconsin. So it made it a very complex piece of election. And so the governor attempted to delay the in-person voting because of COVID-19, and that was denied by the state Supreme Court. And simultaneously, there was an attempt to delay the postmark or the receipt of the mail-in ballots from absentee voters, and that was denied by the US Supreme Court. So all of these courts, which are controlled by Republican majorities, worked in concert with the Republican Party, and the main prize here was the seat on the state Supreme Court, which was ultimately won by the progressive candidates. So in spite of everything they did, they still did not achieve their goal.
Well, Norm, it was a shocking she won by 160,000 votes.
Yeah, it was a 10% margin after all the votes were counted, just over 10% margin, and that was with all of the attempts to keep people from voting. In Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, they reduced the number of polling places down to only 5 for the entire city, and so there was a huge hour-long lines of people waiting to vote. There was also about 1.25 million absentee ballots requested, as compared with 168,000 in 2018, so a significant increase. And there was a lot of issues with the return of these mail-in ballots, and I think that's apropos of what we're talking about here, so I want to just go through some of those real quick. One is the issue of the postmark on the ballot. The judge's decision regarding absentee ballots was that they had to be postmarked by Election Day. But the ballots that were sent out by the state elections board did not have a postmark. Rather, they had metered mail. And so the result was that for the first batch of absentee ballots, the post office wasn't even postmarking them because they were already metered, and metered mail is not normally postmarked. Then at the last minute, they realized that was a problem, and so they made a special postmark for the mail-in ballots, but they forgot to put a date on it. So it just said April 2020. And so then there was a big question about whether or not any of those vote by mail ballots were even going to be counted. They ended up deciding that county by county, which is how elections are run in Wisconsin. And so most of them did get counted. But then the next issue was the delivery of those ballots. People requested absentee ballots that they never received. And then people who did receive ballots and mailed them in, sometimes they were not delivered in time. And because of this decision by the US Supreme Court, that meant that they weren't counted either. So there was a lot of uncounted vote by mail in this election. And so that's an important point to take a look at. Now, again, even with all of these things, and Wisconsin also having, I think, the most draconian voter ID laws in the country, in order to receive an absentee ballot by mail, you had to upload a photocopy of your driver's license to a website, and they did not accept student IDs that don't have a date stamp on them for when the student fees were paid, and so on. So in spite of all this, the progressive candidate did win, and that means that our state Supreme Court conservative majority was 5-2, now it's 4-3. However, the thing that happened out of that that's important for the November election is the conservative justice who lost, a guy named Daniel Kelly, who was appointed by Scott Walker, the Republican governor of fame from 2011. Daniel Kelly was going to recuse himself, but now has said he will not recuse himself from an upcoming court case in the Supreme Court about purging up to 230,000 voters from the Wisconsin rolls. Now, these are voters who were sent a postcard and didn't return that postcard, and so they're considered not eligible to vote. There was a case in a lower court that ruled that they should be taken off the ballot. The state elections board didn't want to do that until 2021. They got a judge to rule in favor of that. There was an appeal. It went to the Supreme Court. Kelly said he was going to recuse himself, so the Supreme Court tied 3-3 last December. Now it's been appealed again. It's going to go back to the state Supreme Court, and Kelly has said he will vote on it, which means there's a 4-3 conservative majority on the state Supreme Court that will be ruling on this case. And then the final issue in Wisconsin is whether or not the state can move to an all vote by mail election for November. And that is, there's a bill in the legislature right now to do that, but the Republican majority in the state legislature says that they're going to block that. So that's where we are right now. And just because Harvey, you asked me this question earlier, there are 19 confirmed cases of COVID-19 that they believe are tied to the in-person voting on April 7th. There were also National Guard troops that were deployed to help with the voting on that day, and at least 5 National Guard members showed symptoms of COVID-19. One was tested and turned out negative. The other 4 were not initially tested, and so we don't know. But again, the in-person voting on April 7th, it absolutely resulted in an increase of cases of COVID-19 in Wisconsin.
So Emily has asked, is there any recourse available about the Wisconsin primary? What do you think is going to happen now after this to the fall election?
Well, I think that, you know, the push for vote by mail is going to continue in the state legislature, but as long as the Republicans hold the majority in both houses of the state legislature and the state Supreme Court, it's unlikely that that's going to go anywhere, because even if it were challenged in the courts, the state Supreme Court would again rule, and we've seen the US Supreme Court as well, ruling in favor of the Republican anti-vote by mail forces.
So how are they going to conduct the election in the fall in Wisconsin? If you don't have vote by mail, what are they going to do?
Well, I mean, there's the regular absentee ballot process, which is still available. And so you can still apply for an absentee ballot. Again, you have to currently, if you're not registered to get an absentee ballot, you have to upload a photocopy of your driver's license, which is very difficult since they also decreased the number of driver's license facilities around the state a few years ago. And a lot of people don't have a driver's license. But there are 2 more elections in Wisconsin before November. There's a special election on May 12th, which is coming up in the 7th district for Sean Duffy's seat in the US House of Representatives. And then there's another partisan primary in August. So there's 2 more chances where this is going to be tested between now and November. But at this point, in-person voting is still the main way of voting in the state of Wisconsin.
Unbelievable. Anybody want to jump in and send a question here? But this is what we're up against, folks. And it's these Jim Crow legislatures everywhere that are killing us, right? I mean, both Ohio now and Wisconsin have made the prospect for the November election look really dicey. All right, keep us posted. Norma Stockwell is the publisher of the Progressive Magazine. And
yeah.
Progressive
One other
Bible.
thing, real quick, I see a question from Mimi about the surrender rule. And my understanding, the way it works in Wisconsin is if you request an absentee ballot, but then you show up at the polls and vote in person, that's actually the vote that gets counted. If your absentee ballot then shows up as well, then you are charged with voter fraud. But I don't know of anything like a surrender rule here in Wisconsin.
Okay.
I just want to say, it'll be interesting to look into the election code only because it seems odd to me that the states would send ballots around and then not track them somehow. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Well,
But
right now they only send you a ballot if you go online and apply to receive one. There is a proposal in the legislature to send a ballot to everybody, but it's unlikely that will happen. And then one last thing that's interesting about Wisconsin is that the power to control elections in Wisconsin was taken away from the Secretary of State a number of years ago. And so we have now a state elections commission, which is an appointed body that takes care of controlling the elections in our state.
Well, what's the nature of that? Was it appointed by the Democratic governor?
If I remember right, it's a series of appointments over a period of time that rotate, that roll. And so I can't remember right now what the makeup of that elections commission is. It used to be a thing called the Government Accountability Board, and it was made up predominantly of former judges, but that was changed also in the post-2011 years. And so now it's a different, the makeup of the body is different, but I don't have the details.
Norman Stockwell, thank you. I see that Dennis Kucinich has joined us. Dennis, you want to say hi real quick? Dennis Kucinich was a state senator and then, Mayor of Cleveland, state senator in Ohio when I was in Columbus, and together with him in the legislature, we defeated a radioactive waste dump. He went on to become a congressman from Ohio for many years, and then a great candidate for president. Dennis, are you with us here? Want to just say hi? Well, anyway.
I think he might have dropped off, sorry.
Okay, he was on.
If he joins again.
Okay, next we're going to talk about Florida, New Mexico, and Nevada with John Brakey, Steve Rosenfeld, and Susan Pinchon. I don't know if Susan's actually on the call. Let's start with Florida. I saw there's something going on today, Steve, maybe you know, in Florida about the referendum to reinstate the voting rights of ex-felons. The state of Florida overwhelmingly approved. The voting rights would be restored to ex-felons, and now it's been challenged by the Jim Crow legislature there. Steve, have you followed that, or John?
Unmute. Well, what's happening is there's a trial today over the requirement that you have to pay all the fees before you can be re-enfranchised. And you can listen to it online, which is a positive thing. And I don't know what the outcome is likely to be, of course, but that's what's happening today. And the most interesting thing that I've seen in Florida, besides that, is that the Association of Supervisors of Elections wrote to the governor saying they really need more. They cannot go to a full vote-by-mail election in the fall, and they need more time and flexibility to prepare for vote by mail. They want to mail out ballots as early as 45 days. That's what you do with the military and overseas ballots. And they want to have the local authority at the county level to actually do vote centers or move polling places if they can't find enough poll workers. And there's been no response yet. So that's the latest I know there.
Wow.
If I could add into that, Harvey, is that they're very heavily vote by mail right now in Florida, okay? But the problem, they don't want to mail ballots out to everybody. They want you to request, and they want to make it difficult. It's the same thing that's happening in other states too. Arizona, same thing. We're 80% vote by mail, but they do not want to mail a ballot out to everybody. They want to make you work to get it and find a way to disenfranchise, I'm afraid.
So both Florida and Arizona have a Republican governor and Republican legislature, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. But that's, we do have a Secretary of State who's very progressive.
In Arizona?
Adrian Fontes in Maricopa, which is the second largest county in the United States now, okay? That is, I think that Arizona has an excellent chance to have a good election because of the work that, you know, I hate to say this, but a bunch of me and others have done here for 16 years, and it's starting to pay off. We are a phase 3 state is what I would call it.
We're hoping that you'll have a big election team with you this year in both Florida and New Mexico. Steve, and both of you were involved in this. The election in 2018 in Florida was deeply impacted by the deadline that was imposed to report the final outcome. Can you talk about that? I mean, this is catastrophic.
Yeah, what happened in Florida in 2018 was it was sort of the nightmare that election officials were fearing, which was that they would have multiple statewide recounts at the same time. And they had it on 3 races. They had the ag commissioner, the US Senate race, and the governor's race. And they have arcane standards for how they conduct recounts. They don't do full recounts. If the margin is less than 50, like 0.5%, I think they run them through the scanners again. They run what they call the overvotes and the undervotes, the ones that are put outcast through the scanners again. If it's less than 0.25%, they do a hand examination. It was a mix of all that. And what ended up happening was, just to sort of cut it short, is they ran out of time in a couple of key big counties. And as a result, the first unofficials, which was the election night returns, became the officials. So it wasn't even really a recount by any stretch that we might like to define a recount. And that's what happened in Florida. And what's important about that, I think, right for now, and we look at 2020 in November, is if we have this avalanche of provisionals, which are going to be in a bunch of places, and you don't have any changes in law, I think it would have to be law. Lawyers on the call can correct me. If you don't change the actual timetables of certification, you're going to run out the clock again. You're not going to get the job done. And that's the big problem with all this vote, this vote by mail stuff, is that it's very paperwork heavy. And most people, and I talked to Mimi about this, just do not understand these levels of things that can go wrong in terms of this identification, verification, and accurate tabulations, and things getting lost in the mail, and other leaks in the pipelines, and then voters, their requests aren't processed, and descending on these few in-person sites. I think tomorrow, by the way, in Ohio, we're going to see some of this, and the only question there, without digressing, is, can these lessons be taken from what's being observed, like Norm just talked about in Wisconsin, so that they don't, because we're going to see different lessons surface in a bunch of these states as they keep running their primaries and other statewide elections in the next couple of months.
So this trial tomorrow or today, ongoing, you say, to determine the state of the ex-felon rule, what court's it in front of?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so everybody knows, I think, on the call that the 2000 election was decided when they banned so-called ex-felons from voting. The state of Florida rallied and passed this referendum to allow ex-felons to vote. And you're talking about more than 1 million voters in Florida. And now of course, the Republicans have challenged it, and the legislature doesn't want to enforce it. The legislature jumped in and said that everybody who was an ex-felon who owed fees from their imprisonment or other related issues had to pay those fees before they could get a ballot. You got to hand it to these guys. They're creative. And I don't think, unlike Arizona, I'm not sure we have a progressive Secretary of State in Florida. And so we're really up against it in both states. Is that right, John Brakey?
That is exactly the case. In fact, we probably will be in litigation in Florida again. We got about 1/3 of the states preserving ballot images. The other ones are saying, why would we save those things? We have the original, and it's very difficult. And we fight to make, show as my slide says up here, I've got into green screen, transparency is the solution. And right now, just so everybody know that we're working in a number of different states. Since I hooked up with Chris Sauter, a Washington, D.C. attorney, well-known, we've been in 18 states analyzing things, trying to figure out who's doing it. We're really like a one-trick type pony organization. We're about public records. We're about making sure that these ballot images, which in the 2020 election, if we go normal, we're going to be like 85% digital. That means when a ballot goes into a machine, it's going to go ahead, as you can see on the screen, it's going to take a picture of it. And it does not count the original ballot, it counts the pictures, and these things have to be saved. And so that's the fight that we're doing in a number of different states, which particularly, right now, we're very highly focused on Florida, Arizona, North Carolina, Michigan, Tennessee, because of Benny Smith, and what we're uncovering there is just incredible. And of course, Virginia, depending on additional funding, we're trying to work with Bob and find the funding we need to really get into Ohio. We were there once before. They're supposedly saving. We haven't tested the system. But we know one thing is that elections are not any good unless they're transparent, trackable, and publicly verified. And saving these images are very, very important to do that because they'd be released. Getting back to Arizona, just wrapping this up, is that, I was on the phone with Fontes, and he, like San Francisco, wants to release the ballot images by precinct because he believes it's important that he proves to people that elections are real. Because, as I tell people in 2016, in that election, if not voting was a presidential candidate, they would have won by a landslide. That means 44% of us didn't vote. That's 107 million people. And a lot of those people, I believe, belong to the Mark Twain party. That's the party that believes that if elections made a difference, they wouldn't let us do it. And we need to win those people back. If it's a snowy day or rainy and I'm out there with somebody, it's cold, I might just turn around knowing what I know and saying, does it really matter?
Well, the thing is that, John, I think that what you're saying is going to be enhanced, unfortunately, exponentially by the attack on the whole vote by mail system and the rest of the whole electoral system. If you have a mess like you had in Wisconsin, where people come down with a fatal disease for voting, and in Ohio now, where it's been made virtually impossible to have an election. Now, this is the second time, so let's get this cleared up. You mentioned a guy named Benny Smith in Tennessee. What is that about?
Well, it's incredible what we're uncovering there. I was against going into Tennessee because, one, it wasn't a swing state. And I've been in and out of Tennessee basically since 2006, working with other people. With Jim March in 2006, he found PC Anywhere on their system, okay? I mean, anybody could hack. We found all sorts of stuff. Susan Pinshaw, who I work very closely, I consider her to be my sister. We're both maniacs from Maine. I guess that makes us a little different too. Great investigators. What we're uncovering in there is that the lawyer who represents the Board of Elections used to be the lawyer for the Republican National Committee from 2004 to 2017. And how they're trying to rig the system for one particular vendor. They're trying to bring ES&S in. They tried to get the board to pass a contract, not knowing who the vendor was going to be and how much money. And basically what they're trying to do there is bring ballot marking devices in because they don't want hand-marked paper ballots. They would like to spend a $10 million budget, and $7 million of that is for replacing an ink pen. It's incredible to know that's what they're trying to do.
Well, that's all over the country.
The ballot marking device to fight across the country.
Okay. All right, I was just curious about Tennessee.
But I just want to add one thing to this lawyer. He also has 3 lobbyists in his office, and he claims that he didn't know that they represented ES&S. That's interesting.
ES&S voting machine company. Okay, all right, John. We're going to.
He also was appointed by Trump to be on the Tennessee Valley Electrical Commission just recently. Very interesting.
All right, we're going to repeat for that, and Mimi is praising John. The Florida felon trial, according to Steve, is in U.S. District Court in northern Florida. Okay. Okay, Mimi, you had your, oh.
Yeah, the one, yeah, I just wanted to reaffirm that I think, Breaky, your work state by state for so many years on these ballot images and making them public record is one reason why there is a diminished opportunity for digital election fraud that is undetectable. So I believe that with the call for vote by mail, it's been a convenient way for some thinkers to shift to suppression via vote by mail. So our work here is really important, but I want to thank you, John Break It, because you're having a huge
I want to thank you and Ray Lutz. Now, Ray Lutz has invented a program that can take the digital images and count them. Okay?
All right, so digital
and Steve can tell you what they're doing in Maryland with this stuff and how important it really is to get this stuff. Okay?
Well,
because this country needs elections that are transparent, trackable, and publicly verified.
Let's talk about this real quick.
You know, democracy is on the ballot.
Well, democracy is the ballot. So one of the things that's come up here, I'm not sure everybody is up to speed on this, so I want to make sure we all understand. There is a question of how the ballots are going to be counted when they come in. And, you know, if everybody in a perfect world got a ballot and mailed it in or rocked it in, they would have to be counted. And counting 138 million ballots by hand is a challenge. So John has proposed and promoted a system of digital imaging where every ballot goes into a machine, a digital image is taken, and the ballot itself is preserved in a plastic bin on the other side. Technically, it should be a really good way to go. There are issues that Mimi and others have raised.
Harvey?
What we're looking at here on the screen is the digital image. Emily?
I just want to correct a tiny thing that you said, which is that John is promoting the idea of these digital ballot images being created. They're actually already created by a lot of the voting systems that are in use. They already exist.
Right.
This is not something we're trying to create.
But they're still not everywhere. And
They're
there
not
are major questions we're going to face, which speaks to this, and I will do this more detail next week, please, is basically how these digital images are going to be dealt with, and how, and the big question is how are the vote by mail ballots going to be counted, and especially in states where there are really tight deadlines that it's physically impossible to get them counted. And this is an issue we're going to have to deal with both generically nationwide and importantly state by state. So John has been promoting, and we'll come back to it next week, a digital image reading machine where digital images are, and they are in place.
I just want to say, Steve, if I could, is that like Emily correctly said, this is how the system works now. The old optical scan is gone. It went extinct, okay? Optical was a light coming down. These machines don't work unless the ballot goes to the machine, it takes a picture of it. It's like a digital scanner that you have in your house, most likely. Okay,
it is,
if you're
it is
scanning
not
documents.
universal. It is there are, Emily, you're right. They are in many places, and we're going to have to take an inventory.
We have already.
Okay,
and
so
right now, it's 85% of the country has it, and if they go vote by mail, will be 98% digital. And it will be all hand marked because you cannot mail out a ballot marking device.
Okay, let's
so
deal with
that's
that
the trick of it.
Let's deal with this issue next week. And it's incredibly important.
It's very important
Incredibly
because
important.
it's what we really can do. We don't need to pass laws here. We just need to make them follow the law. Destroying public records that actually were counted by the machine is illegal. And that's what we do. Preserve.
All right, so let's go into great detail that next week. We really understand this, have to understand it, have to have a grip on it. You've done incredible work in getting these machines out there. I don't think we all understand how important this is, especially now, if we're going to vote by mail, it is a perfect system to a certain extent. But Mimi has raised questions, others have raised questions about being dependent on these machines. Let's talk about it next week so we can get through the rest of we're down to 23 minutes. We have Bill Lacroix in Montana, of all places. Bill, are you with us? Bill Lacroix, you still on the phone?
I'm here.
You contacted me. There you go. Okay, Bill, tell us. You are a perfect Montana backdrop. The moose is still in the window. Tell us exactly, real quickly, what's going on in Montana.
Well, I am not voting rights heavy hitter here. I'm an interested party. I tried to get some more savvy folks to participate today. They were busy.
Well, let's have them back next week. You see,
I'm trying, and I will. I've got a lot of studying up to do this week, and thank you for that. The thing that's happening in Montana that I know that is of concern is, well, Montana. I don't know. You say it's got a progressive background, which we do, but currently we're run by the Tea Party. And the Secretary of State is one of those. He came in singing the Trump song about, voter fraud, and we're going to fix this, and take an aim at Missoula County, which is one of the few liberal vote-leaning counties in the state, and tried to set up a new voting system, get new software put in, set up a new voting system with an outfit called B-Pro out of South Dakota, and I'd be interested to know more about that outfit. Was going to give them $2 million. Didn't end up happening because it was just a crazy idea, I guess, but it's not happening this election cycle as far as I know. All the elected officials, including Governor Bullock, who's running for the state Senate, which is why most of you are interested in Montana, are saying they want to go to vote by mail. Like I said, I got a lot of homework to do on what that's going to mean here.
Do us a favor, Phil. Do us a favor. Come back next week with some other folks and can you give us a full report next week?
You bet. One more thing.
Great. Yeah,
one more thing. Montana's Green Party seems to be taken over by the Tea Party. The Montana Republican Party just spent $100,000 to get it on the ballot, and Bullock's got a guy running against a lady running against him on the Green Party. So just so you know.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So next week we'll revisit Montana. Okay.
Okay.
I do want to point out, to finish our state by state, mentioned at the top of the hour, the New York primary has been canceled, and I think we need to wait for that to sink in for a week and talk about the implications of that. I will say on the good side that the Indian Point nuclear plant is being shut. So they canceled the primary, and they've also shut Unit 2, Unit 3 will shut next year. It's a big step forward. And we can thank Andrew Cuomo, at least for that. Alan Minsky, are you still on?
I am, yeah. I just want to chime in on that. And I don't think people should lose sight of the fact that, much like Morgan Harper in Ohio, who pretty much any hope of her winning in the next 2 days was probably torpedoed by Bernie closing down his campaign. Progressive candidates up and down the New York ballot, including people like Jamal Bowman, are going to be seriously hurt by even not having Sanders people go to the polls. And so the entrenched hawk Elliot Engel will feel more secure because of this decision. And it could even, though unlikely, it's a bit of a stretch, it certainly means Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will get a lower percentage of the vote too. So it damages progressives up and down the slate. And if you know New York politics in recent years, there was a big progressive rebellion that knocked out the working center-right majority that Cuomo had in the state legislature. And now who knows how that'll swing. So it has all sorts of implications up and down the ballot, and it's pretty repugnant.
It is. Now, Alan, we want to talk about this organization and PDA. You and I discussed. We hope that PDA will be active with us in partnership to get young progressives in state-by-state organizations to deal with the election in the fall. I mean, we're discussing these issues in a national call, but they're really mostly going to be decided state by state, and we need, hopefully, I'm looking for a central repository for documents having to do with state by state issues by the way that the election is going to be conducted, and the listing of organizations. So you want to talk about PDA, who you are, and maybe people don't understand and how you might interface with all this.
Well, pretty much, and I think Mimi, I know has to leave in like a couple minutes, or maybe she's already gone, but with Mimi's guidance and your guidance, and now we're connected with Bob Petrakis and Steve, whose last name Rosenfeld, is that right? Did I get that right, Steve?
Yeah.
I owe him a call, and we're going to coordinate because we have we've established an avenue for funding for a low-level hire. And just to be very clear to everybody, what PDA brings to this very specifically, along with Trust Vote and other partners who I know are on the phone, Emily Levy's organization, for instance, where we will all be in tandem having the information be as available and as clear and as concise in its clarity for everybody, and have it be so that it speaks to each state, because we do understand we're going to get very little out of the federal government in terms of what we want to see, which is a federal call for universal mail-in ballots with everything that we want on top of that for the fall. It's going to go state by state, so it's going to be an informational glut. But if you break it up into the individual states, we got to make it digestible. So PDA is there for that. Our website will get all the information just reproduced there. But what we really bring to this equation is we are a national organization with activists who we work with now for 16 years, as we've been around that long, across the country, who can anchor getting the information out to all of the states. We don't have active chapters in every state. I think we're active in about 28 or 30 states, but we have activists in every congressional district, actually, not just every state. So, that's what we can really provide. And we can have people in each state who we have anchoring, helping getting the information out to people across the country.
So you're at pda.org, is that right? What's your website?
No, PD America. I mean, there are a few states, and you can imagine the states where we're weak. And then we also have a tremendous partner in Andrea Miller, and some of the states where progressive Democrats of America have been weak are the very states where Andrea is strongest. And so, yeah, and we do well in some of the, plain states and northern mountain states. We're very strong in the Southwest, and then with Andrea being strong in the Southeast, we pretty much have the whole country covered. So
Yeah,
that's the role that we're really going to contribute to this. And I'm very much looking forward to talking to Steve, again, working in coordination with folks like Emily, because the goal is what's most important here, getting people to understand how these things work.
Well, Alan Minsky is a great, great activist. It's a wonderful thing that he's a PDA. He got me my show at KPFK, and we're going to continue with him. Yes, we want to have Skip, Alan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I hope we're going to continue this. This has been almost 90 minutes, and it's just flown by. We still have as many people on the call as we did originally. We will reconvene again next week, and every week as we go. There's so much more to cover. We do need, I skipped over Lynn Bernstein and Dan McCready. I don't know if you're on. Jennifer Roberts, if we can have a report from North Carolina, which is absolutely essential, that would be great. Lynn Bernstein and Jennifer Roberts.
Yeah, this is Jennifer. So I tried to get Dan McCready on, and apparently he is in a remote location that doesn't get really good telephone service.
Okay.
But I'm going to connect you by email, and you can ask him to give a summary of his experience in North Carolina for those folks who weren't on the call last week. Dan McCready is the Democrat who ran in District 9, where there was uncovered absentee ballot fraud, election fraud, where we had a couple of campaign workers, one of whom is in jail, were collecting ballots that were unsigned, or that were signed but not finished, not completed, and not sealed. And they were serving as witness. They were finishing the ballots and then turning them in. It was hundreds of ballots. And so unfortunately, that whole election had to be redone, and Dan McCready did not win in the redo, which was on an unusual day and all the things that happened with low turnout. But he's in Montana writing a book and about his experience, and he will be connected by email. We do have There's someone else on the phone from North Carolina with transparent elections. And we have a number of groups in North Carolina: Democracy NC, Action NC, of course, Common Cause, ACLU, all the usual folks who are looking hard at, our legislature is still in session. They have not given any indication of wanting to improve access whatsoever. And we're just worried that they'll do something that will make access that much harder. They've closed polling sites, taken them off college campuses, reduced hours of early vote, all kinds of things to try to make it hard. So North Carolina is definitely a battleground. We had a lot of candidates here for the primary, and we had Trump here the day before our primary. Donald Trump came to town and had a big rally. So we're also supposed to host the Republican National Convention in August, if that still takes place in person. Many of us are hoping it won't. So in any event, North Carolina is definitely in play, and we look forward to helping with this effort and continuing to get good voter information out there. We're also hosting a national summit on voting rights in early August, again, if that happens in person.
So North Carolina is absolutely crucial. You have a Jim Crow legislature and a Democratic governor. Who's Secretary of State?
Elaine Marshall, a Democrat.
Okay, so that might be helpful.
And we have a Democratic Attorney General, Josh Stein, who's also very, very progressive and very strong. We have a tough race. Our lieutenant governor runs separately from our governor, which is interesting, and they could be from different parties. So we'll see where that race ends up. They are right now; they're different parties, and we will see where that goes.
So North Carolina has been right down there in the shamelessness department with the Wisconsin, Ohio, and other legislatures. Okay, we're almost down. We're down 319.
Can I add a few more things real quick for North Carolina?
Thank you.
Lynn Bernstein, go ahead.
Yeah, so three things. One, right now there's a lawsuit that's been filed. Judicial Watch filed a lawsuit against the state of North Carolina trying to purge voter rolls. And so that lawsuit is pretty new, and League of Women Voters and some other groups have gotten on board to fight that. There's also a lawsuit against the state of North Carolina from Free Speech for the People, and they are fighting against the express vote ballot marking devices. And so that was just filed, I believe, last week. So that's in the works. And then the other thing is that North Carolina just, for the first time, has online voter registration. It says, yay, this is great. What we have to keep in mind is that the DMV has been notorious in the past about not getting the information to the Board of Elections. And my husband was actually victim to this. When we moved, he changed our registration at the morning of the election, and they did not change it. I changed my registration through a paper form that I mailed in, but his still had the old address. So
there's still plenty of
trying to find ways to get information to make sure that the people who registered through the DMV understand that they really need to go check their registration and make sure that it actually went through.
Okay, so thank you, Jennifer. That segues, we're almost out of time, but that segues into a very important piece of the puzzle, which is one of the other groups that we're working with to deal with the registration roll stripping. That's Andrea Miller's group. She's not on the call, but Joel Siegel, if you're with us, Joel, if you'll give us a minute or two on Andrea Miller and her organization, they will be partners with us along with PDA and many other organizations. Jennifer, that was very good. Thank you, and I hope you're going to be on the case for the next 6 months to help things in North Carolina. Joel Siegel, are you there?
Sluggo, thank you for organizing this very important call.
Okay, so tell us about Andrea. The next thing on the agenda was registration roll stripping and reinstatement, which Jennifer spoke to. Lynn Bernstein. Can you tell us about Andrea Miller and her organization? And then we're going to have to wrap it up.
Yeah, Andrea Miller, who's in Northern Virginia, very connected to social justice community, across the nation. So what she's been doing is she has software, and she goes through the swing states and looks at the African American registration list, looks to see who's, also who's been purged. Then she works with the NAACP or groups in that particular state to re-register people and to try to ramp up voter registration. Stacey Abrams, by the way, is doing something very similar, except she has $10 million from Bloomberg. But Stacey Abrams Verified, I think, is a great model for what you're doing. And I'll just close by saying that my 89-year-old mother in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, was just purged from the voting rolls, and she's very angry about it. And her 93-year-old boyfriend purged. They've been there for 30 years voting in Florida, and this is going to be the evil trick of the Republican Party. I know this is not partisan, but I'm not being partisan. I'm just being academically and factually correct. The only way they're going to win elections, they believe, is by stealing them. We've reached an authoritarian point in our elections, and we have to battle back. This has to be taken very seriously, what you're doing, because the future of the country and the world depends on vote by mail and protecting elections. So thank you so much. Anything we can do.
So we do have state, maybe next week. Thank you, Joel. Maybe next, you founded this COVID-19 emergency response group. We got PDA. We have Andrea Miller. Maybe we can hook up as well with Stacey Abrams' group. And I will say, nonpartisan as we are, that the Democratic Party of New York's decision to cancel their primary is horrendous. It's extremely anti-democratic, very dangerous, as Alan Minsky pointed out, with very significant, specific consequences. We can't stand for this kind of stuff. We did not get to polling and drop-off places, vote counting state by state, and reporting deadlines, which Steve Rosenfeld was going to talk about. We want to talk about more about PDA, network building, state by state, and money. But Ray Lutz, you still have your hand up. Is there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on from what, just briefly, what John Brakey was talking about with the ballot images, to announce that our group has been developing a ballot image auditing system called Audit Engine. And so we can take the ballots from districts and run them through this software thing, and it will total them all up. So we've run it across like the Dane County ballots that had 154,000 ballots. Leon County had 141. And now we're working on San Francisco, which has quite a few more ballots in it, about 500,000. And so it is some work to get to set it up so that it will run because of all the nuances. But it is a tool that we need to start looking at, keeping this in our mind, that if we can get the ballot images, we can really test the consistency of these elections like we've never seen before. So I just wanted to briefly mention that.
Okay, we'll talk more about that in depth.
I think later we're going to be announcing it with a press release. Thank you.
So, good. Well, thank you. So send all documents to me at Solartopia, solartopia@gmail. If you got your invite to this conference, well, just email me anyway at solartopia@gmail.com so that we have a complete email list. We had 40 plus people on the conference call for the whole time. Next week, we are going to go into great detail on vote by mail. We're going to also deal with the deadlines, with the surrender rule, with the polling and drop-off centers, with vote counting and state-by-state reporting deadlines. We need a plan of action. Hopefully we can bring in Alan, if you'll be back, and if we can have a webmaster at PDA, that would be great. Paul Zeitz has done incredible work putting this conference together. I hope you'll be available next week to do it again. And then we just got to keep at this. This news from New York is extremely disturbing. And as Alan has pointed out, is going to have very, very significant impact. We'll also have a report next week from Bob on the fiasco in progress in Ohio. And, we want to talk a little bit more about gerrymandering as well. Does anyone else want to chime in here before we sign off? Anybody have a hand up? Okay, everybody. So we'll see you again, same time.
Emily has her hand up. Sorry, Harvey.
Emily, go ahead. Emily.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. So I just wanted to say that Inside Scrutineers, the website, it's a membership website for people working on election protection, and we have discussion boards in there, and we can have subgroups of people with a private discussion board within the site. And if this group wants to use that tool, it's available. So Harvey, I'll be in touch with you about that, but anybody's welcome to go to scrutineers.org and join and see what we're doing. And it's a way to talk to each other and follow the discussions you want to follow and not the ones you don't want to follow, because it's really hard to coordinate work on calls like this. So it gives us.
Okay, well, we'll find a way between PDA and the other organizations. We will have a central repository. Send me at solartopia@gmail any documents that you think and any other information that you think needs to be included in this ongoing handbook or guidebook or whatever we want to call it. But this is obviously the fate of the earth is in the hands of this this fall election, and clearly we're up against very, very serious challenges. I will say in conclusion that if we were looking at 117,000 voting stations for 138 million people, it would be a more daunting challenge. At least with vote by mail, we have a much clearer situation of what we're going to have to deal with. It's daunting, and there are a million different ways that they can prevent people from getting ballots, but it's a little simpler than it might have been. So think about it. Email me in the coming week. And Paul Zeitz, again, thank you so much for pulling this together. And we'll see you next week, 5 o'clock Eastern time, 2 o'clock Pacific time on Monday. Thank you very much. And no more stolen elections.
I just unmuted everyone to say goodbye. Thanks, Harvey, for your leadership.
Thank you, Harvey.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harvey.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
See you next week.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Oh.
Just on this conference call.
Button where you say leave, Jim?
Do what?